having me on. I appreciate it.
Of course, Brian, you come from a lineage that first set foot on American soil fleeing World War I in Europe. Over the decades, your family, like many others, has witnessed some profound transformations, specifically in the area of agriculture, from the aftermath of the Great Depression to some of the technological advancements that have changed farming practices. Let's start with your family's story. How have you seen the landscape of American farming change over the years, and what's been the impact of these changes on your family?
Well, it's been a stark change, and I appreciate you asking. It's a proud heritage for anybody who's had the chance to be part of a farm family for 4 generations like we have. It also is something that's evolved into a crisis. So when my great-grandparents first escaped pre-World War I Europe, as you said, to dig a living out of the ground in southern Wisconsin, farming was a growing entrepreneurial venture. There were more than 6 million farms and more of them being added all the time. Since that time, we've had really a national crisis that's been going on for decades, losing farms at the rate of 45,000 farms per year on average for a century. And there's still a lot of pride and a lot of hard work and a lot of good things being done to help feed the country. But it is a source once of a strong middle class living that's been slipping away for decades now.
What do you think are some of the biggest driving factors to this? How hard is it to get some of our younger folks that are coming up right now into the farming business? And did your family ever consider moving from rural to urban areas during the economic hardships that have cycled through?
Yeah, it's something that every farm family wrestles with each generation. There's a large number of people who have left the rural areas, gone to urban areas. I'm an example of that. I pursued a career off the farm in writing, and I'm so grateful to be able to tell our story now in my book, Land Rich, Cash Poor. And I come back and I work on the business side of the farm. My parents throw me in a tractor on my day off. My sister farms with my dad. And farm families have been facing that dilemma each and every generation. Some of the things that have driven this are really economic crisis and social change, like people moving to urban areas. Also, technology, leaving farms behind in a way that didn't have to happen. And also government policy. So many times during economic crisis and during good times, our government has had mistakes made that have driven more firms out of business than needed to be the case.
Talk to us about the impact that the lockdowns and the supply chain issues from COVID-19, how it affected the farm industry, and how your family weathered that storm. Specifically, from what I understand, your father had COVID and then survived the virus, but it also put the farm at risk.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was an example moment in the book where we told a story of my dad getting a case of COVID that was really quite severe. Some folks, of course, it's mild, and we've experienced that too. But this was a very severe case that kind of puts you in the hospital, the kind that risks you needing to be on a ventilator, that kind of thing. So my dad was on a commission, and I took care of my dad as he recovered while my sister kept the farm moving forward. And when a farm family has a family member like that who's taken out a commission, it can really put a farm in great danger. What was happening to farms like ours and others at that time is it was harder and harder to sell our goods because that supply chain was locked down, right? Either COVID or the government's reaction to the virus was keeping those who move our food through its system from being able to transport it. And so many farms like ours couldn't sell their goods. We were lucky we didn't have to dump any milk, but many, many farms did. That happened at the same time that consumers will remember they weren't able to find what they needed in the store. And if they could, it was more expensive. So how do you have a food system that's in many ways a modern miracle, but is so vulnerable with that supply chain that farmers can't sell their goods and consumers can't find the food they're desperately looking for? That's really a dystopian situation that this country lived through, and it's one that we're at risk of going forward as farms continue to disappear more and more.
Now, what role would you say that faith and spirituality played in supporting your family during difficult time?
When you grow up close to the land, my feeling is that you grow up seeing God's miracles each day. And I grew up working with my dad from the time I could walk. We would see incredible difficulty and economic hardship. We'd also see beautiful things. A calf taking its first breaths, planting in the spring and seeing the miracle of something growing and being harvested by the fall. So you really learn to put your faith in God, especially when you are battling the elements and trying to figure out how is the natural world going to give and take. And so you grow up with that, and I would say that it's sustained us every generation, all 4 of those generations. And times where my dad was sick, other times where we had challenges, we turned to prayer, and it's part of that farmland resilience that people have, where you're individual enough to dig your living out of the ground, and yet you care enough about community and your fellow man to come running when a neighbor's in need. And God and faith runs through all of that.
You mentioned the special nature, and I can just hear it the way you tell the story about growing up so close to the earth, as you put it. From your upbringing, what lessons from your father would you say stick with you the most?
You know, work ethic and doing something that you're passionate about. We're all put on this earth to do something that we value. And for the longest time, I was the first eldest son in 4 generations to not carry on the farm. I'm grateful my sister is. But that is something that I carried around for a long time. I felt the generational pressure that I had to have done that. And what I learned as I went and pursued my writing career and came back around to be able to tell this story is that just as my dad worked so hard and was so devoted and so passionate about working in his fields, I can do that with telling our story. And so taking that work ethic from him and taking that devotion to a calling from him is something that I've found that we have in common, even though we didn't do the exact same thing with our lives. And I'm grateful for that every single day.
And to your point, you've now spent roughly a decade documenting the economic and cultural shifts in rural America. Do you have any stories from this time that have really stuck out and maybe touched you a bit?
Yeah, the thing that I have noticed most, well, there's so many things, but one thing that is really interesting is my sister, as she's taken over the farm, we've gotten an opportunity to really show how people in rural areas help with social progress. I mean, she has taken over from my dad. When my dad was sick, she was fixing machinery, milking cows, keeping the chores moving, all in a man's world, all in a place that traditionally might have been something where, people would roll into the yard to sell a seed and they would look to my dad and said to her, she's really shown how you can take the reins. And it's something that runs all throughout our history. You go back to my mom, grandma, great grandma, women and men in rural areas, they did the same work together. They worked shoulder to shoulder. They worked the land together. And that's really something that shows how everyone can advance and everyone can move things forward. And it's so cool to see my sister live that out today.
You've also documented the loss of individual farms and the rise of automation in the agriculture sector. How does this mass production impact public health and the American people in general?
It's a great question. We have a system that pumps out more and more processed food than ever. There's a lot of data that shows that a large majority of Americans want to have healthier food. Actually, a recent survey showed 70% of Americans want to have healthier food. That same statistic, actually, more than 70% of Americans consistently show that they trust family farms. And so what that means to me is that we need to have farms that are finding it harder and harder each year to grind out a living. We need to find new entrepreneurial opportunity for those farms so they're not just locked into maybe growing field corn like they would have done before and they can't make as much money as they used to on that, but new opportunities where they're growing fruits and vegetables and produce and new types of herbs and spices for specialty food markets, different things that can fuel this new interest that the American public has in knowing where their food comes from. It can create new opportunity for our farmers rather than wiping them out as we've been doing in this crisis, and it can create more options and healthier food and more freedom for consumers out there who want to know what it is that they're putting in their bodies to nourish themselves and their families.
Now, with the consolidation of farmland into fewer and fewer hands, there's a concern about foreign ownership. For example, as of 2022, you mentioned that foreign investors own 43 million acres of American farmland, relatively small but rapidly growing amount. What are some of the risks of allowing foreign adversaries, such as China, to gain more control over our nation's food supply, and how can we protect it from being acquired by foreign investors?
This is a fundamental danger. Not only is the disappearance of our farms driving up the cost of our food and challenging the health of our food, but it is fundamentally putting in danger the supply of our food. And the Chinese and other foreign adversaries, they're not only buying up more farmland so that they can have us captive, but they're also buying that farmland up to next to military installations and other strategic places. And those things are not coincidences. We shouldn't believe that those are coincidences. So what it means is that the Chinese, as this happens, more and more will be able to have a hand in our food supply. And there's no more fundamental security than a country being able to feed itself. Think about a crisis like COVID. Think about war. Think about uncontrollable weather disasters. Moments where we need to make sure that we can feed ourselves. If we lose control of our domestic food supply, and if it is under the control of a foreign adversary, we are in as grave of danger as a nation could be. Things that we can do, the good news is this is one of the rare areas where there's been some bipartisan support. There have been some additional reviews that have been put in place to allow foreign adversaries to purchase land. We need to strengthen those. We need to build on that. We need to make it so that no foreign actor with ill will toward America is able to purchase our farmland. And we need to have more transparency into the process so that people know. I can tell you that nobody's going to walk up on my dad's porch and get him to sell his farmland to China. But as we get that land in fewer and fewer hands, there are a lot of companies that just have to protect shareholders, and they might turn around and sell it to a foreign interest without having any real sense of the concerns. Or we may not be able to see it. It may go through different companies that keep you from being able to see who the actual end buyer is. So more oversight and more transparency is what's needed.
What do farmers want to see in this next administration, and how can we protect the farmers, knowing and support them throughout? Knowing that there could be some tactical tariffs on the way that may temporarily stall exports.
Yeah, what farmers need overall is they need new entrepreneurial opportunities, so research and development that can bring innovation into farming in a bigger way again, create a whole new generation of crops and products that farmers can be pursuing again to feed consumers who care more about where their food comes from than ever before. And they also need rules that allow us to make sure that we've got fair competition going on domestically and internationally. And that gets to your question about tariffs. It's a complicated picture for farmers. Farmers have been finding that China has been cheating and impacting their prices for a long time. Farmers are among the most strident supporters for getting tough with China. But and tariffs are a tool in that. If the tariff situation goes too far and ends up turning into a retaliatory situation back and forth, tariffs upon tariffs upon tariffs, what will happen is it will become harder for American farmers to sell their goods because the price will be going up. And so we need to be careful about that. And farmers are very supportive of getting tough with China. We just need to have a balance that accounts for the fact that we can't have our farmers getting caught in between in a trade war that may drive up the cost of their goods and make it harder for them to sell.
Get store-wide savings at the Capital Report. I'm Steve Lance. You shop for Black Friday sales or have other family traditions for the holiday weekend? NTD's Sam Wong was out in D.C. to hear from the people.